Yeah. Oh, by the way, happy birthday.
Thank you
40
very
years old.
much.
I can remember that my 40th birthday very clearly. Well, fairly clearly. Um, right. First of all, a question I've never asked you before is the story about how you discovered humanism. I mean, was it always there, Andrew?
Yes.
You weren't born and said you were a humanist? So how did that
No, I
happen?
wasn't, but I was raised that way. So I had well, firstly, my entire family were non-religious. So my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. There was never any religion in my family, and as far as I know, hadn't been for quite for some time. So I wasn't one of those who was raised in a religious family and then had any sort of you know sudden
Epiphany. Oh,
disruptive realization. No,
yeah.
exactly. So so I had a humanist upbringing,
So,
sometimes with the word mentioned. I mean, I I remember reading Barbara Smoker's book on humanism at school, in school RE. I can't remember whether it was just in the classroom, whether we learned from it, but anyway, I certainly encountered it there. And my mum was a member of the BHA, um, on and off, I think, not one of those constant members, and so I always knew of it, and so I was always aware of this approach to life, humanist. And of course, my education when I got to secondary school was very much focused on classics and the ancient world, and where it wasn't, it was sort of focused on um, modern history,
mm,
and so I just who knows how you form your identity and your self descriptive labels, but yeah, it was
mm.
always just there for me, actually. You get a lot of people, and you hear them all the time, maybe it's even true of you, David, I don't know, but you get a lot of people, don't you, who say, when I discovered the word humanist, I realized it described what I believed all my life.
Oh, that's exactly how I
Yeah,
felt.
people
Yeah,
say, is it your case?
yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't the case for me, because it was always the word and the beliefs and values were already all swirling, together, in my context anyway. So it's always just been that way for me, and I never sought to depart from it. I would say that I've extended and deepened and reflected on my humanist beliefs and values over the years, but I've never found any cause to depart from them. Of course, I've had doubts about things, as we all have doubts. We should
Mm,
have doubts
mm.
about the legitimacy or validity of one or other belief or value, um, or how I would argue it.
But,
Um,
the, but, but,
but I've never changed them.
but there's more to having a point of view, which is a humanist point of view, and becoming an active humanist. And
Yes, that's
you've
true.
actually dedicated your life to this. So
I
I
didn't
just
expect
wonder
that to
what.
happen, by the way.
Pardon?
I didn't expect it to be
Oh,
my
didn't
life. I
you?
wish I hadn't said that. Now that I'm 40, is this it?
um, no, I mean, I was intrigued. It's not just a passing thing, is it? It's something that's a really important issue to you, as it is
Yeah,
to me.
yeah.
And at some point along the line, you must have thought to yourself, "Well, bloody hell, the world would be a better place if humanism was
Advances.
better
Yeah.
recognised."
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I joined the BHA, as it then was, in 2002. And it was very much to support their campaigning. I don't think I would have joined simply to express my humanism, although many people do, of course, because they want to be part of a sort of like-minded
mm,
movement or
yeah,
community or organization, body of people.
yeah.
Um, but that wasn't it for me. Although I've got a lot out of that community since, it was the campaigns, and it was faith schools, and that was what was going down in 2002. Like a lot of people, I was just shocked, rocked, I might almost say.
Mm,
It
mm,
rocked my view of where we are as a society and what progress means, when the government decided to expand and diversify and increase religious state education in England, and give more money to church schools, expand church schools, bring more Christianity into the curriculum, diversify it to other types of religion, and just infuse religion a lot more into education. And it seemed to me that that was almost, counter historical, because I felt that
mm,
I was living, as lots of us did who came of age in the late 90s, I felt that I was living in a secularizing time when it was just obvious that religion was something, mass religiosity,
mhm,
widespread social religiosity in this country was something that of the past, if it had ever really existed, but it was certainly something we were moving away from. And that is true. We are still, as a society, moving away from it.
Yeah.
And in that context, I just found it it was a shock that government might do things that were totally counter to that trend. And from my view, were extremely damaging, especially when we were an increasingly diverse society. I mean, I'd grown up quite at ease with diversity in a Midlands working class area and family. You know, there were lots of people whose parents had come over for the factories or the hosieries or the car production that was in the West Midlands at the time. So there was a sort of, a lot of people who were the children of those immigrants who I was at school with, primary school, which was a very totally secular primary school. We didn't have any religion in our primary school. And I went to a secondary school that at the time described itself as secular. Now it describes itself as Christian, but then it described itself as secular in the 90s. And so, I felt that was all my experience of being a young person, a British person in the West, a citizen of this country, sort of told me that that's where we were going, towards that more secular, diverse future, a diversity that needed to be respected, right, and not have an education system created which divided people. And so, just in that sort of milieu, really, is why I joined the BHA as it then was, because I just wanted to sort of contribute to the work to stop that negative innovation of expanding the role of religion. And unfortunately, that has continued under successive governments since. But BHA has played an important part in holding it back and limiting it.
But what do you put it down to, Andrew? What do you think has caused this?
Well, I think it's great. Well, I don't know. I mean, there are obviously lots of complicated. Every complicated event has lots of complicated causes, numerous causes. Certainly, the Blair government, which came out of the, the sort of liberal Labour stuff of the 80s and early 90s, they definitely sort of had an idea that a growing diversity of population in terms of ethnicity and religion ought to be matched by a sort of equal provision of schools. I think the argument from the Muslim point of view was very strongly heard. I don't know if you remember Cat Stevens, or the artist formerly known as Yusuf Islam. Cat Stevens.
I remember.
Had lots of meetings with Jack Straw at the turn of the century, and was very, it was just quite cool, the idea that you'd have Muslim schools to, from a sort of multiculturalist perspective, I suppose. It was if you had to give a name to that impulse, it would be a multiculturalist one. So there was that very clearly. There was obviously the belief by some, and I would put David Blunkett, if that's the sort of Jack Straw, slightly Blair type, equality, diversity type argument for faith schools. I suppose people like David Blunkett had a slightly different prejudice, which was that somehow Christian schools, state schools, were very successful academically, he felt.
Well, that's commonly thought, isn't it?
Which is commonly thought. And he said, he wished he could bottle the magic of faith schools, because he felt they were academically successful. Now, of course, you and I know, and the evidence shows they're academically successful because they're academically selective. Middle-class parents push themselves into state faith schools because they push themselves into any selective system that they can navigate because they're educated and sharp-elbowed. So that's that was the David Blunkett thing. And then there was I think the Labour government of the Blair government felt relatively warm towards the Church of England because of the criticism the Church of England was seen to have given to Thatcherism and so on in the 80s. And so I think there's a general warmth towards the Church of England from New Labour. A lot of old Labour people are very secular, but then I think, and the Church of England very firmly wanted to expand its provision. What happened actually in 2001, 2002 was as much part of the Church of England's initiative as it was part of the government's initiative. It was the Church of England that decided that they wanted more schools and more Christianity in their schools. In the 80s, 70s and 80s, church schools, church state schools, faith schools, were becoming indistinguishable from normal state schools, community schools. You know, the Christianity was going away. It was becoming much more inclusive, much more community oriented. And then there is a point at which the Church of England, I think at the beginning of the 21st century, realized that their future was seriously threatened. And they needed to re-Christianize, and certainly they needed to expand their provision of secondary schools. And so there was this remarkably choreographed thing where the government made an announcement in the morning that they were expanding church schools, religious schools, and the Church of England's press release welcoming it came out 1 second afterwards, and it was obviously a coordinated initiative. So I think that there's some of the causes. I mean, obviously there are many more causes, I expect, than that.
Yeah, I assumed that this may have been a reaction to the increasing influence of Islam in this country, that they might be bolstering themselves up, because they put a public front of everyone being understanding and collaborating and working together. But I imagine that behind the scenes there's a lot of serious competition, and that they are concerned
between religions.
Yeah,
that's
an impression I've had.
Oh, what? How do you mean, like between Muslims and Christians, for example?
Yeah, well, if you like, but not just Muslims, but maybe Sikhs and Hindus. I mean, there's been a lot of immigration in this country, which has brought in a lot of different faiths, and I wonder if the Christian Church is reacting to what they see as a possible influx of other faiths and other religions.
Interesting. I mean, I think probably it is in a way, but in a non-competitive way, because I think it's sort of, although I think you're right. The social development is the one that you described, growing diversity and growing immigration. But I think the motivation behind the reaction of the church and others is slightly different. I mean, you're definitely right that we're beginning to see the points of conflict between Sikhs and Muslims, Hindus and Muslims, Sikhs and Hindus, those sorts of points of conflict now play themselves out in our society, and that's very interesting. And actually, I think some of that's quite encouraging to some extent, because especially where each of those people from each of those groups are beginning to challenge the Christian status quo, because of course for many years, and this sort of brings me to the second point about it, the Church of England in particular has put itself forward as being, the representative of faith. And they've said, we're here so that faith has a place at the heart of the nation, and we're here to support all faiths, and they say faith, not religion. It's put all these faiths and come together. And they've, in doing that, I'm sure they don't have entirely selfish motivation. I'm sure they want to make people feel included and so on. But I think they also have a self-interested motivation, which is that it obviously shores up their own power and authority.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Number of Anglicans going through the floor. So what else can they do other than either they've got a couple of choices. They can choose to just become a really big provider of social services and pretend that that's also got something to do with, pretend the people who are providing the social services, like all the non-religious people who volunteer in churches to do food banks and things, that they're somehow now Church of England people, which they do that, and they then sort of say, look at how vibrant Church of England is. It's not actually the Church of England at all in terms of Anglicans. They've got that option open to them to stay relevant. And they've got another option open to them, which is this sort of like, well, we are the home of all faiths, and I think that. So I don't think it's that they're competitive. I think it's that they think they're almost syncretic. They want to bring those people in and speak for them, and as a result, though it's not entirely self-interested, as I say, as a result, they preserve their own authority. But that's why I think it's encouraging that especially young Hindus, young Sikhs, I think, or certainly the ones that I meet, but then I suppose that's just selection bias there. But the ones that
the humanists among them, yeah,
exactly. Well, they are humanists, many of them. Yeah, that's true. But a lot of them who are religious don't like the Church of England's approach to them. They don't like being made to feel, the Church of England talks about hospitality to others, and hospitality is the right way to treat a guest. But it's not the right way to treat, your equal, your co-owner of the house, your equal citizen. You don't want, you and I and Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims don't want a hospitable Christian nation. We want a nation of equal citizenship.
Mm.
Hospitality is the frame through which the Church of England has constructed a lot of its approaches to those of other beliefs. And there's a proprietorial aspect to that, which I think is quite unwelcome.
Mm. Yeah, I find it a strange contradiction, actually, that Christianity would welcome other faiths, when the whole point of being a Christian is that you're a Christian above all other faiths. The other faiths are wrong. Yours must be right. And I imagine.
Well, I don't think lots of Christians think that.
Don't you?
No, I don't think so. Not in my experience.
Hmm.
I mean,
Okay.
I mean, obviously the real believing ones do.
Hmm.
But a lot of people who identify as Christian is quite woolly, isn't it?
Hmm. Yeah.
You hear people identify as Christians say things like, "Oh, it's all the same God, really," or whatever.
I remember an evangelist handing me a leaflet, and I said, "Don't worry with me, I'm an atheist." And he said, "You're a what?" I said, "I'm an atheist." And he said, in public, this is, "Then you will burn in hell forever and ever."
Oh, well.
I thought, well, fair enough.
And you like that? Do you prefer that to the wishy-washy one? Do you? Or
No. I'm very happy with the wishy-washy.
Because it's more authentic.
Although, have to be said, Andrew, that the extremists, if you like, are easier to deal with because they're because they are ridiculous.
Anyway, yes, well, that's true, isn't it?
Yeah. No, that's
anyway. That is true.
So the next question I've got is about your humanist heroes and heroines. Has there been anybody who's particularly inspired you? I mean, obviously Alice Roberts and Jim Al-Khalili and current people, but anyone in history that have stood out?
Yes, I don't like talking about current people because it's a bit divisive, isn't it?
Yes, I wasn't suggesting that.
People who are safely dead, they're the ones to choose as heroes. Because also, you never know how people are going to turn out. If they're still alive, they might do something awful.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, imagine if Richard Dawkins discovered Christianity. Oh, no.
Well, that has happened. I mean, one of our patrons, a philosopher called Anthony Flew. When he became senile, two things happened to him. He became very anti-Muslim, quite prejudiced against Muslims, and quite unpleasant about Muslims and immigration and things like that. And the second thing he did is he suddenly thought that, well, there might be a God after all. So this guy who'd been a patron, in his prime, when he was a sane, empathetic, reasonable person, was still a patron, having become this sort of crazed person. And so that can happen. It's not going to happen, I'm sure, with Jim or Alice, but dead people are safer. So there's loads of people. I mean, like you say, I've just done this little book of humanism, which has got like 100, and they're all heroes. I suppose recently, who have I been reading most recently? I've been reading some essays again of James Baldwin, the American humanist, novelist, and essayist. James Baldwin, a bit of a hero. James Baldwin and E.M. Forster and George Eliot. There's three novelist heroes.
Right.
All humanists. I like humanist novelists because, and I like talking about humanist novelists because it makes the point of lots of scientists and philosophers we talk about all the time, as being humanist heroes. And we know that all the scientists are humanists and all these philosophers are humanists, that's a very widespread thing. But so many creative people, artists, authors, have also been humanists. And in the case of novelists, the novel is an incredibly humanistic art form. It relies on empathy. It cultivates your imagination. It's an incredibly, fiction is an incredibly powerful aid to moral development, and for children and adults.
Yeah.
And so, I'd like to mention as many novelists as I can. So James Baldwin, George Eliot, Ian Forster, and then probably social activists. They're the ones who always forget as well. I mean, at the moment we've got a research program going on because it's our 125th anniversary next year. Humanist UK's, 125. Puts 40 in perspective, doesn't
it? and 72, I'm glad to say.
72, yeah, even 72.
Even 72, yeah. And I'm Methuselah, yeah. People get up on the tube to offer me their seat these days.
That's very generous. I hope we're not going on the tube at the moment.
No, but when it happens, I'm kind of astonished. I suddenly see myself in other people's eyes. I mean, yes. I'm thinking, oh, a sprightly young man. They're thinking, oh, poor old bugger, he needs to sit down,
I know.
But it's very kind of them, So I never refuse. I always say thank you very much, It's very nice.
My grandmother, always used to say, about people even who were younger than her, like, oh, poor old thing or something, or get up on the bus, try to give you a seat. But that is, you
have to be
don't
careful
realise in your own head how old you really are, really.
Yeah.
What we talk about, yes, the social activists. So yeah, so novelists, I think it's important. That's why I've named 3 of those. And I guess other heroes, I think that we probably, yes, well, that's right. In the course of doing the research for the 125th anniversary, of course, the researchers that have been working on it have turned up all these incredible humanists from the past that one doesn't know about, like, the lots of suffragettes.
Right.
One of our first executive director, the equivalent of my job, was an amazing suffragette called Zona Valence, Miss Zona Valence. The woman who campaigned for and successfully brought in free school meals, free school meals, she was a humanist, yeah. So huge numbers of unknown people like that, and I think that that's quite interesting. Jenny Lee, I admired Jenny Lee. She was the universities minister who founded the Open University. She was a humanist.
Oh, right. I thought it was Harold Wilson. But Harold Wilson.
Well, he was the prime minister.
Yeah.
Of Humanist UK. She was Nye Bevan's widow.
Oh, was she?
Yeah.
Oh,
well, he was
right,
a humanist too, of course. But I'll choose her over him though as my hero. Yeah. Okay, so I think those 2 categories, artists, novelists, writers, and social activists, people who've changed the world. They're the 2 categories of people I admire. But that's not to denigrate the philosophers and scientists. But we talk about them all the time, don't we? So
yeah. Just an aside. I mean, have you ever heard of you must have heard of the radio program Desert Island Discs, where they're left on a desert island and they're told they can have 2 books. One is the works of Shakespeare, the other is the Bible. But if it was you, what would you have instead of the Bible if you were stuck on a desert island? Just a throwaway. I don't know. You'd probably have the Little Book of Humanism.
No, I don't think so. I want something bigger. I'd probably have. Do I get the complete works of Shakespeare for free?
Yeah.
Do I?
Yeah.
Okay. E.M. Forster, complete works of E.M. Forster.
Right. Okay. Well, if it ever happens, I'll try and arrange it for you.
Thanks. Airdrop. Well, hopefully, if you know where I am, you'll rescue me.
Oh yeah, I hadn't thought of it.
Drop off
a book. Anyway, okay, let's on to something a little bit more serious. Membership of Humanist UK and its influence has expanded enormously, I have to say, under your leadership. I mean, when I first joined, it was less than 6,000, I remember. Gemma Hooper told me the numbers were. But now it's, I believe it's somewhere around about 80,000 members and supporters. But, I mean, has this made a big impression on the world? I mean, has it made people in the House of Commons, where you spend a lot of your own time, has it made them sit up and take notice, the number of members that you claim to?
Well, I don't think it's as blunt as that, no. I mean, the fact that we're a growing movement, that not only in terms of members, but just in terms of our social impact, when you think about how many people go to a humanist ceremony each year, or how many people, just hear about humanism in school or elsewhere. So the fact that it's that we're growing and have a wider reach and wider impact does make a difference, of course, because it tells people, politicians who run our country and make decisions for of social policy, that this is a large and growing demographic, and that they ought to be attentive to the concerns of people within it. So it does make a difference on that level, but it's not so blunt as we're not a trade union. It's not like the trade union is the Labour Party, that you sort of how many millions of pounds have you got and how many members have you got, and there's your influence. But it certainly does make a big difference. I mean, the big development, of course, that we've been through in the last 10 years is that we realised that there was a big barrier to participation in humanists, in what was then the BHA, which was finance. We were an old-fashioned organisation which had to join and pay a subscription to get involved in, and really that was inhibiting. And so I think the biggest development for us was introducing the concept of people being supporters, sort of with all the benefits of membership, really, apart from not voting at the AGM, or who does that anyway? Not many people. So, but with no fee. And of course, that's what's really expanded the number of members and supporters. So although membership certainly is, active paid membership is well above 20,000. I don't know what it is exactly. The category of members and supporters, some of the non-member supporters are big donors, of course. Some of them give more than the average member, But the fact that members and supporters it's touching 100,000 actually, rather than 80,000. That makes a really big difference, because those people who aren't paying members and who 10 years ago wouldn't even be on our database, they do a huge amount, emailing their MPs, signing petitions, sharing stuff, school speaking, loads of stuff they do. And so that's, I think, been really important.
And there's a lot of the stuff that they're doing that probably you don't know of. I mean, I'm frequently sending messages to my MP. We're actually on first name terms now, but we
Yours, Maria Miller.
Maria Miller, yeah, yeah. She
and
told
do you
me
feel you have an impact?
I don't think I have an impact.
You've not been changing her mind very noticeably, actually. I'm sorry to say. It's
no. I've been trying, but all I get is the party line from her.
Yeah.
And when we had that conversation at open public meeting, she took me to one side after the talk, and she said, "You promoted me as a Christian," and I said, "Well, yes, you told me you were a Christian." She said, "Well, yes, I am a Christian, but I don't go to church every Sunday, and now because of you, I'm going to get into trouble because I'm not going to church." And I thought, well, there's a bit of sincerity. I mean, I'm not impressed with her as a politician, although I like to keep on the right side of her, because otherwise I don't want to just shut me off. I want to carry on the dialogue, keep on the persuasion. But I'm sure I'm not the only one. There must be other people who do that without your knowledge.
Oh yes, I think so. I think we've got I think people are engaged, aren't they? I mean, if they're,
yeah.
Do you feel that we give you the tools you need to make the right case to her?
Yes, I think you do. I think you do as far as you can. I'm not really sure what else you can do. I mean, we've come up with Humanistically Speaking, which I think will become quite valuable locally, because it allows humanists to talk to each other and to develop ideas together. That's the only gap that we're filling. No, I think you provide us the tools very well. I think you're in constant communication with us. You're always sending stuff out.
That's good.
And that's quite useful. And it's impossible for you to listen to all of our points of view and ideas. Therefore, there's a case for Humanistically Speaking. I think that's going to provide a valuable service as time goes on.
Do you email it out to people, or
yes? Well, no, we send out links now.
Oh right, yeah, I thought that. Yeah,
and in fact, we need cash as well, so we're thinking of advertising, taking on advertising.
Oh, what do you need cash for?
Because we want to. We've got aspirations of becoming semi-professional, and that's a whole new ball game that we need to develop and grow. We've got about 2,500 readers right now, and people from all over the country are now contacting us and asking for copies.
Yeah.
So we're hoping it will spread. Anyway, one question I wanted to ask about charities. Humanist UK is a registered charity.
Yes.
I was curious about, there must be lots of common problems that registered charities have. This is not strictly a humanist question, but I just wonder if charities ever get together and discuss their joint problems. Do they ever come to joint solutions, or do you treat each other as sort of competitors? Or
oh no, yeah, there is of course there's a large national organisation representing charities, the NCVO, the National Council of Voluntary Organisations, which Humanist UK is a member of, and they do very good work at representing the interests of the charitable sector, and also networking charities together so they can learn from each other. Because there are lots of common problems. And we're organisations that share a common regulator, obviously the Charities Commission, and as a result, we do have a lot in common in that sense.
So you don't actually have meetings between the charities?
Oh yeah, there are meetings. There are meetings online and in person, and sector-specific meetings. Yeah, I don't get to go to many of them. I mean, it's like everyone always wants to sort of join their trade association, don't they, and do their networking, but then you never actually have time. But they're there when you need them, and there's a good draw on. And then there's something called Equally Ours, which is a coalition of charities specifically working in equality and human rights sectors, and that's what we're a member of as well. And then there's an association of chief executives of voluntary organisations, which I found personally useful, people who run charities. And everyone's always encountered whatever problem you've got before, right?
Yeah,
so
that's got to be an advantage, I'd have thought.
Exactly. So it is very useful in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. One question that's a little bit more prosaic than that. Lots of folk are humanists, but not members of Humanist UK. What would you say as to why they should join Humanist UK? Well, I've come across this many, many times.
Yeah.
People say, "Oh, yes, I'm a humanist, but I'm not a joiner." I find that.
Yeah, well, that's the problem, isn't it? By definition, almost.
Yeah, but I think Humanist UK has a very clear objective. It's not a political party, but it's almost it's got clear political objectives. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And I think there are lots of there's a whole range of stuff out there which has a definite humanist position and a humanist point of view. And I'm very happy to say that Humanist UK is expanding into some of those areas. So I just feel that, well, you said yourself that you got into humanism because of faith schools, and I think broadening the range of Humanist UK hopefully will encourage more people to join it and more people to become involved. Maybe that's working.
Well, it is, isn't it? I mean, membership and supporter and membership numbers are going up all the time. I mean, like I say, I think that as important, if not more important, than growing membership is just increasing the number of people involved, per se. So growing the supporter base is vital. That's where the growth has come from. So the supporter base has gone from 0 to 80,000. Membership, like you say, has gone from 4,000 to 20,000 in the last, whatever it is, 15 years. So the growth of the supporter base, of course, from 0. So of course it's great. It's it's big, but is much more significant. And I think that's an area to grow. I mean, of course, we need membership subscriptions to keep running. And when Humanists, when BHA didn't have members and didn't have professional staff in the 80s and 90s, it was a disaster. They couldn't do anything. So it's essential. But growing the supporters, I think, is still probably where the greatest growth will come from. And like I say, many of those very active contributors to our cause, just because they haven't got money doesn't mean they haven't got time, wisdom, and commitment. And so I think those things are equally important. So that's where the growth has been. I mean, when trying to persuade someone to join, I think you just say, well, look, if you value this work, make a commitment to keeping it happening. If you value the work of advocacy on all these social and political issues that we lobby on and lobby successfully on. If you value the provision of community services to vulnerable apostates, to people who need pastoral care, to the training and continuing networking of celebrants for funerals and weddings. If you value the work about promoting humanism, just informing people that this is an approach to life that is available to them, then support it with your money. And if you haven't got money, support it with your time.
By the way, I think faith to the faithless, you mentioned a bit in the aspects. I think that's possibly the most important thing that Humanist UK has moved into over the last few years. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not.
Well, it's extremely important, of course.
Yeah.
And it has a very high impact in the lives of people it affects.
Yes.
But also the providing not just of support directly to the people that are involved in that, but the provision also of training to public authorities like the police forces, like the social services, so that they are able to better recognise the safeguarding issues and support people who are in those have vulnerabilities because they're apostates, I think has been really important.
Do you get the impression that the services, particularly the police force, are responsive to Humanist UK? To the movement.
Oh yeah, I think very much so.
Yeah, because I've had that impression as well, that the police.
I think most public authorities are really.
Yeah, yeah. What, in your opinion, then, is the most successful initiative that Humanist UK has launched in recent years?
Interesting. I think supporting I think we'd have to repeat that one. The specifically the training of public authorities on those matters. I mean, it's true that individual apostates have been supported, but it's also true that the training has had a much broader impact than that. I think probably the reintroduction into our portfolio of community services of pastoral care has been very important, and the professionalisation of that to provide a real discipline to humanist pastoral carers has been important.
Yeah.
Of course. On the campaigning side, the achievements of legal humanist marriage in Northern Ireland and hopefully shortly in England and Wales are significant achievements.
Yeah,
and
I keep pressing Maria Miller on the humanist marriage stuff.
I know, but she's definitely a party line person on this. It'll just be the review must take its course. We don't want inconsistencies between religion and non-religious belief groups. It's all complete blarney. I mean, it's just.
That sounded just like a letter that she sent me.
Yeah, well, I can get that, I'm sure, because she's just been echoing whatever the party line is, which is totally concocted and nonsensical. But there we are.
Well, what is it then about? Is it particularly the Conservative Party that had this negative? I don't know. What is this?
I think barrier? So. Yeah. Well, it is the Conservative. I mean, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrat Party, and every other party in Parliament, apart from the Conservative Party, are declared themselves in favour of giving legal recognition to humanist marriage immediately, and only the Conservative Party said they weren't. So I think we must conclude that it is something about the Conservative Party that makes them not want to recognise humanist marriage, or to try to do so in some wholesale reform of marriage law, for some other end of their own. I don't know, but of course they are just notoriously resistant. I mean, they are the party in which obviously we have our lowest representation, and and that is very difficult for us. I mean, the current chair of the all-party parliamentary humanist group is a Conservative, and of course we've got Conservative members, and there's a Conservative Humanists group. But it is more of an uphill struggle with people from conservative political traditions, because of course there is something progressive about the humanist approach to life and to society. And so if you're a member of the Conservative Party that is a member of the Conservative Party for more, as it were, libertarian reasons, because you're a liberal, because you want people freed up, I think you're more likely to support humanist movement. But if you're a genuine conservative, as in you're a backward looking person, of whom there are many people, of course, in our countries, we know, then you're less likely, of course, to buy into the fundamental assumptions of humanism, which is that we make society, we can shape it, we can change it, we should look at what works, and we should reject things from the past that don't work. We shouldn't be bowed down in front of the pressures of religious tradition, yes, but also tradition generally, conformity.
Yeah, you might be interested to know that one of our members in Basingstoke knows James Arbuthnot. I don't know if that name rings any bells with you.
Yes.
But he actually came to her home and gave us, about 40 of us, a talk about his atheism, and why he kept it secret right until the very end.
Right until the end, yeah.
It caused a bit of a stir. Why it should cause a furore, I don't know. But he did talk about the pressures and strains. But also, I got the impression that there was a lot of hypocrisy in the background. Most of the Tories that he knows, most of his associates, felt the same way as he did, but they weren't prepared to go public. They weren't prepared to admit it. Which I found.
I think they worry about their local parties.
Yes,
Conservatives. They shouldn't worry about their electorate, of course, because their electorate doesn't care about religion. one way or another. But their local parties, I think they're always more worried about. I suppose maybe completely unnecessarily. I mean, some extremely successful, Conservative MPs have been humanists. People like Tristan Garrell-Jones, whose local party loved him by all accounts. Crispin Blunt as well. I mean, his local party.
Yeah, Crispin Blunt. Yeah, is a good example, isn't he?
So I think that, I don't think they need worry about these things. And perhaps the Conservative Party will change, especially as younger people become involved in the Conservative Party, because of course they're less likely to be religious anyway. I mean, it's interesting that of members of Conservative Humanists, they're mostly young, overwhelmingly young, really. And that's not a surprise. They're also overwhelmingly from that tradition of the Conservative Party's from that tradition of the Conservative Party that is on the libertarian side of things rather than on the socially conservative side of things.
So there is
social
hope.
liberals.
So there is hope. That's good. Do you think that we humanists should be more evangelistic about our beliefs and ideas? Or, I mean, it's. I'm not suggesting we knock on people's doors like Jehovah's Witnesses. Although when we have Jehovah's Witnesses knock on our doors, we invite them in usually for a cup of tea and have a chat, and they've stopped knocking on our door. It's a bit of a shame. But do you think we should be more pushy about our beliefs?
What do you mean?
Feelings about it. Well,
should we
trying
knock
to
on
sell
people's
the
doors?
idea. No, I don't think we do that. But trying to persuade people into a humanist philosophy, to get them into to have stalls where we try and persuade people to become humanists and what a good thing humanism is. Do you think we should be more directed in that way? Because
it isn't an aim or a purpose or even an object in our formal charitable objects of Humanist UK to persuade people to become humanists. So that that just isn't something that we're into. We are here to increase public understanding of humanism and to support humanists. But since humanists is probably about a third of the population, that gives us a pretty big job to do. So
yeah,
my view has always been that at this stage in our society, and it's different for other humanist organizations in other parts of the world with different contexts, but at this point in time in our society, that the job of a humanist organization should be to increase knowledge of humanism amongst people who have already humanist beliefs and values, to help them to develop their thinking and understanding.
Do you think we're being successful in that way? The reason I ask is
I think so.
I joined Humanist UK at the age of 57, actually, because when my son went to university, he told me about humanism, and I spent the first 57, nearly 58 years of my life having never heard of humanism, never heard of it. And I felt when I discovered it, I thought, bloody hell, where have I been all my... This is exactly where I am. But I just wonder how many other people there are like me who have just never heard of humanism, never knew it existed.
Well, you're talking about
who are humanists.
Yeah, well, you're talking about the performance of the BHA in the past, aren't you? Up until the point 15 years ago where you learned of it. So ever since then, we've been rapidly and consistently growing. And humanism is on the school curriculum by law in Wales, increasingly in England. Humanist marriage is the biggest form of marriage in Scotland. You just can't compare the past with now.
No, maybe that's right.
The past is another country.
I just hope the word is getting out there. It just worries me a bit, because most people I speak to, if they've never heard of humanism, and you do meet them from time to time, you tell them what it's about and say, yeah, I'm with that. That's exactly how I feel.
I don't think you should be discouraged about people not having... Most people haven't heard of most things.
Well, that's true.
So, there's a there's a solid 60% of the population that is impossible to reach about most topics. So I would not worry too much about that. Although, of course, it is one of our aims to have humanism understood widely. We do polling on this every now and again, of course, every year or so, and we find that about a quarter of the population know what humanism is.
Okay, so just changing the subject.
More than know what Sikhism is, or any of the sort of smaller religions. So I think you've also got to decide what your benchmark is.
Mm.
Like, what do you want them to know what do you want humanism to be as well known as?
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, I'll have to think on that, Andrew, and reflect on that.
Okay.
Okay, so just changing the tack again. You're president of the IHEU.
Humanist International, is it now?
Yeah, Humanism International. In what parts of the world do you think is humanism under its greatest risk? I mean, we hear horror stories all over the world.
Yes, of course, it's under great threat in Islamic states, of course, specifically. Increasingly in Southeast Asia, places like Malaysia. Although ironically, of course, it's also growing very fast in those areas. It grows fast where it's threatened, or maybe.
Really? That's interesting.
Well, or maybe it's most threatened where it's growing fast.
Yes, one could be the other. Yeah.
The other way around, because of course you can't. 30 years ago, it would have been impossible to persecute humanists in Malaysia because there weren't any. And now it's much easier to persecute humanists in Malaysia because they exist. And so, they are organizing and appearing on social media and so on and so forth.
You sound very optimistic about the future.
No, I'm not optimistic at all.
Oh.
What gave you that impression?
Well, you just said, it seems to be spreading all over the world. It's becoming a.
Oh, well, of course it is. I mean, of course, the number of humanist organizations is increasing everywhere. The number of people involved in humanist organizations is increasing. The great spread of English language media all over the world, of course, is increasing the breadth of impact of the concept of humanism in that language, with that word and so on. Many parts of the world have.
That's cause for optimism, surely.
Yes, I mean, I don't think of myself as being optimistic or pessimistic. I'm just describing the reality of what the current situation is.
Yeah.
Of course, there are lots of reasons to be depressed. Ethnic nationalism, tribalism generally, religious fundamentalism, enormous rising authoritarianism, either in terms of state power like China or in former democracies. And all of those things affect the spread of humanism.
About the USA.
Well, hopefully not for much longer.
No.
And so, all of those things affect humanism because humanism flourishes where freedom flourishes, where the choices are available for people to think about their own beliefs and not to be negatively affected in their lives if they choose to think freely. And so, so we'll see. But I mean, it's still probably better now to be a humanist anywhere in the world than it was previously.
Well, there's a long way to go yet, I think.
Well, that's certainly true.
Anyway, do you have any particular humanist projects in mind for 2021? What's going to happen in the future, Andrew, with Humanist UK?
Well, interestingly, we were meant to complete our strategic review for the next 3 to 5 years this year. We've just come to the end of one strategic period, which is 2015 to 2020. But of course, because of the pandemic and everything else, that's all been moved forward. So our planning for our next strategic period takes place next year, which is a bit difficult because by that point, we're well into the new parliament. Although they've been, of course, also railroaded by the pandemic, as everyone has been. So it's difficult. I mean, for the moment, we'll focus on growing the work that we're doing successfully now. So, increasing the ceremonies, increasing the pastoral care, increasing the apostate support, increasing the program of education in schools. These are all things that are working. And so we will do more of them and do it better. That's the aim there. And then in terms of political advocacy, advocacy on our causes, that's very difficult because to some extent you need to be responsive to what government priorities are. And we don't yet know what they will be. So in the last couple of years, because of the logjam in UK politics, is that one of the consequences of the logjam in UK politics is that we've been doing more stuff in Wales, more stuff in Northern Ireland, and the devolved governments, because you can make progress there on things like education reform or marriage reform or these other matters, while the UK Parliament is jammed up Brexit firstly, and then with coronavirus. So so there's all of that. Sorry, that's my dog barking.
So coronavirus must have had an enormous effect on the central organisation of humanists.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, it had the biggest effect on our celebrants. You know, funerals went through the roof and weddings went through the floor. Obviously, that was one thing that happened this year. And the pastoral care needs increased rapidly. We couldn't have our events and produce our resources and everything else. So there's just, I thought we'd be finished. So there's someone just come, but I need to go and.
Yep.
How far are we along?
Oh, nearly there. Nearly there.
Okay. All right. Then let me just say that. So, and so we had to shift to a lot of our events to virtual, of course, like everyone has, and produce more content. We did a brand called Humanism at Home, which was really successful, viewed many millions of times. And we also had to shift our education offer, of course, from school visiting, which became impossible, to just encouraging teachers to download our resources online, and that increased fourfold the downloading of school resources by teachers. So that was
I can understand that. I'll go straight to the last question. I mean, things are tough going, as you know, for most local groups these days. But do you have a New Year message for our readers, or would you like to send something to me in writing about a New Year message? Your interview is going to be published in January.
Oh, I see.
I'll put you on the spot there.
Well, you know, I think that it's been my New Year message is it's been an incredibly difficult year, and there's no point pretending that it hasn't. You know, lots of us have experienced personal tragedies, and on a bigger scale, you know, as much as some people want to market the year as having been an opportunity to take stock or to innovate or to improve, the reality is that it's been one of those times when ordinary people just have to get through it. But we have got through it, most of us. And the good news is that we're better equipped now than at any time in the history of our species to deal with the sort of situations that we face. Not only is the international enterprise of science working remarkably quickly
I think it's
to bring us a
staggering.
vaccine, you know. But we have all those systems of social support developed, so many of them by humanists, you know, like Bevin or Beveridge, that have supported people through it. The sophisticated, compassionate equipment of a modern society and a welfare economy. And so, both in terms of science and in terms of organized compassion, we've come through it better than any human society at any point in our history before us would have done. And that's cause for optimism, because all those forces continue to operate for the improvement of our situation in the future. And so, you know, there'll be better days ahead.
Brilliant. Okay, Andrew, thank you so much for your time.
It's so nice to see you.
Lovely to see you.